Thank you, Ashley, and good morning, everyone. I'm Doug Kouma from Meredith Corporation, and this is my first ACT experience. It's been great hearing from all of you and learning from all of you. So you get a content guy this morning to talk about Meredith Core Media and specifically the Magnolia Journal that we launched a few months ago and how that came to be and where we hope to take it. So I also want to call out my colleague, Michelle Bilyeu. Michelle, raise your hand. Michelle is Creative Director for Meredith Core Media. And she and I are really a team on bringing a lot of these new projects to life. So let's see. There. So what is Meredith Core Media? Well, we grew out of the Meredith Special Interest Publishing Group. We're a relatively new group, less than a year old. And the idea here is to provide a path to bring third-party brands to print. These are generally going to be smaller to mid-sized brands. They're going to be niche brands. They're going to be those that aren't able to make a huge investment in launching a new magazine. And they're going to be those that really fit what we do at Meredith in the home, food, family, garden type space. So why are some of these brands wanting to launch a magazine? Many of these are digital first brands. Well, I think if you think about what we've heard over the last couple of days and think about what we know, magazines are again becoming really the premium tangible product for a brand that says, hey, we've made it. It's a feather in their cap that says, we're legit. We're here to stick around and exist. Many of these brands are looking for tangible keepsakes. These aren't $2.99, $3.99 flimsy magazines. These are the $10 cover price, almost soft cover book quality magazines that we think and these brands think their consumers would like to have on their coffee tables and keep around for a while. You know, some of these brands will go a self-publishing route, and that works just fine, but some are going to come to publishers like Meredith, and why would that be? Well, if they want to crack into that national distribution, and with our group, we're in US and Canada, if they want to realize some savings on the back end, on the printing, production, and distribution, you kind of have to work with somebody who's got some scale in order to make that happen. And what's in it for Meredith? Well, we have and for a long time, have had a pretty robust special interest publishing program, largely under the Better Homes and Gardens brand and a few other Meredith brands. But there's a point where the market's a bit saturated on Better Homes product. So we began a few years ago looking at opportunities to utilize our newsstand infrastructure in a way that would help some of these brands realize their goals and in a way that would diversify our portfolio a little bit and bring some potential new revenue streams to us as well. So I've got just 4 quick examples up there so you have a sense for the totality of what this group does before we launch into Magnolia Journal, which was obviously the breakout hit of the year. One of the first ones we launched was Beekman 1802 Almanac. Who is familiar with the fabulous Beekman boys? Okay, that's not surprising. You should check into them. They're a really fun group. But we tested 2 issues with them. They're primarily a commerce and digital brand, and it just proved tough to scale on a national level. And we'll come back and talk about that a bit at the end. The second one up there is a brand called Forks Over Knives. That's a plant-based eating brand. They shy away from the word vegan, but there was a documentary out there about 4 or 5 years ago that led to several cookbooks, that led to a pretty nice digital operation that has now led to meal plans, packaged food goods. They were ready to get into this space. Forks Over Knives has been the sleeper hit of the season, and we'll chat about that. Eat This, Not That is a pretty well-established quarterly magazine for us at this point. We're into our 3rd year of publishing with them. That is Dave Sinzenko's Galvanized Group, if you're familiar with his brands. And this was really the original. This partnership predates the formation of Meredith Core Media, but it's something that came through the old Meredith Special Interest Media and is kind of the solid performer at this point. That's a quarterly magazine. Makes a nice little bit of money for both sides. Nothing close to the scale of Magnolia, but a nice business. And then the last one up there You can barely see on the top left, that's an AARP branded bookazine, Scam Alert. It's identity theft and fraud protection. Just a good example of a group that has a publishing wing, that has relationships with other publishers. There's nothing exclusive about this, but a good idea is a good idea. And this is the second one that we've done with AARP, and everyone's been happy with performance there. So the one you've probably heard about, and the one we're going to dive into as a little bit of a case study today, is the Magnolia Journal. Who has heard of Chip and Joanna Gaines? Okay, that makes a little more sense. So this one, we knew we were onto something pretty early, but I will say at every step along the way, it exceeded expectations and continues to exceed expectations. This thing was profitable, significantly profitable from issue 1. The first issue, and we're looking at the premiere issue here that came out last fall, the highest newsstand sell-through percentage I've seen in my career, 18 years at Meredith. That's going back to when times were pretty good. Approaching 70%. Yeah. You heard the other night we had to go back to press and reprint this. What you didn't hear is we actually went back to press twice. We went back to press the first time, also the only time in my career I've ever known us to do that, but the retailers were demanding it. The second time is because new subscribers were demanding the first copy or their collection would not be complete. And as they got into the flow here and were served the second issue, where's my first issue? That's the one I want. I'm going to put these on my shelf. So we actually went back and did a third printing, a small printing, to be able to fill those orders. The part that still makes me hyperventilate a little bit is that from idea conception to on sale date, less than 5 months. So this was quite a project to work on. It's really nice to celebrate a win in this industry. Really nice to celebrate a win in our world. We were so used to seeing numbers just kind of, holding flat for the last year or two, but nice to see something like this. So how did this come about? Well, if you are a fan of HGTV, and it looks like many of you are, you absolutely know who Chip and Joanna Gaines are. They are ratings sensations with their Fixer Upper TV show. But beyond Fixer Upper, they have a brand called Magnolia. That's their personal brand. And it's something that they began talking over the last couple of years about new ways to build out. So Magnolia includes their retail operation in Waco, Texas, Magnolia Market, which is not just a quaint little market. It might be the idea you have in your head, was for me until I visited. They have a real estate business in Waco and surrounding areas. They're building a pretty nice brand licensing program. They've got a book publishing program. They're opening a restaurant. I don't know when Joanna sleeps. I actually don't think she does sleep, but they're kind of doing a little bit of everything. And she, a little over a year ago, started thinking about a magazine as a way to bring all of the disparate elements of this brand together and provide a platform for what she wanted Magnolia to be and how she wanted to be known, differentiated from how they're known on Fixer Upper. So, as I understand it, Chip and Jo, working with their agent, approached a few publishers. Conversations with Meredith's business development team went pretty well in the beginning, and the next step, we felt, was to bring them to our Des Moines headquarters and see what we do and meet many of the people that they'd be working with to see if this would be a good fit. So, May of last year, this is not even a year ago, we brought Chip and Jo and some of their team to Des Moines. And really this was about just making sure this was a good fit on both sides for us to experience what they wanted this thing to be and for them to experience what the Meredith vibe was and specifically what the group they'd be working with, the special interest media group vibe would be. So you see Joanna walking through the test gardens there at our campus in downtown Des Moines. You see Chip playing with a saw that you can stick your finger in front of, and the infrared light, as it gets too close, the saw immediately stops, and he wanted to actually do that, and Jo wouldn't let him do that. That's their creative director, Emily, walking through some of our food photo studios. And then up at top, you see one of our desktop imaging operators showing them the hard work that happens on the pre-press and production side. We just felt like it was really important for them to see all of these pieces. That's one benefit we have in the Des Moines office is space. We have all of these things under one roof. We have them all immediately accessible to us. And it was good, it went well. So that day ended with a roundtable discussion, talking about timing, talking about capabilities, who would do what on which side. They don't necessarily have a content operation, at least not to the scale that would be required to get the magazine out the door. How involved did they want to be? Did they want this to be turnkey on our end? How much would be done in Waco? How much would be done in Des Moines? I think it's interesting to note when you are outside this industry a little bit and have the perceptions you have. We started our presentation that day in Des Moines by wanting them to understand who Meredith was and what we do. And obviously Meredith's flagship publication is Better Homes and Gardens. And they kind of looked at this slide of all of our subscription titles, and at one point Chip asked us to flip back and said, okay, what's the biggest one up there? And we said, well, it's Better Homes and Gardens. And how many, what's the circulation of that? 7.6 million. Oh, really, that's all? Yeah. And he said, well, we can do that. We'll beat that. There was an education on both sides along the way, and they do have fantastic following through their social networks and their TV fans, and probably have an audience nearly that big. But translating those fans into paid customers is a totally different experience. So we ended that day with this discussion. What might this thing look like? We talked about anything from a one-off test issue to a full-scale launch of a monthly publication. Kind of all settled on this idea of a really high-quality bookazine-like format quarterly journal. Everybody seemed happy with that. The seasonality of it seemed to fit the Magnolia brand pretty well. And the pace of it felt like something we could all do. So we left that meeting that day in Des Moines. Jo called a couple of days later and said she was in. Let's do this. We had 4 months to get it done and get it out the door. So that reality set in pretty quickly. This was not going to be a high budget, heavily staffed, drawn out, high profile launch. This was really going to be dive in and do it. So while the lawyers and the agents worked out the terms, I assembled a small team of 6 editors and art directors from the Meredith Special Interest staff in Des Moines. We all, like I said, collectively hyperventilated, and then we got ourselves on a plane down to Waco, because the next step for us was to immerse ourselves in the Magnolia brand and really understand what this thing was all about. So we headed down there for 3 days, visited what's called the silos. That's where the Magnolia market is. So that's the photos you see on the bottom left. And those grounds, it's really a large property. Have food trucks, have the shop, have a stage for live music, have some outdoor gathering areas for families. Really quite an impressive operation. We were able to tour some of the homes that Chip and Jo have renovated. So the one above, which you can barely see there, I think was a fixer-upper home. We also saw some of the homes that they've just been working on flipping through their real estate business. And the picture down at the bottom, that's Jo's, that is their headquarters, that's their workspace. Really lovely work area, very casual. And it was a good chance to get a sense for how they approach their work, how they approach their blog and their social content, and really dive into this aesthetic. And a couple more things here. There is a garden, garden is important to them. There's a seed and supply store on the property. The thing you see in the foreground on the top is the bakery, the Silos Baking Company, which was not quite open yet when we were there, but we were still able to go in and taste some cupcake recipes, so that was kind of fun. The picture up at the top, that's the back of the shop at Magnolia Market. That is a team of 9 people, primarily Baylor students, packing and shipping t-shirts. 9 employees to pack and ship t-shirts. So what became quickly apparent as we dove into these conversations with them, this was not going to just be a home renovation magazine. That's what we sort of approached this assuming. That's what we all know Chip and Joanna Gaines to be. That's not what the Magnolia brand is necessarily all about. To Joanna, it's important that the brand includes food, gardening, entertaining, family, relationships, life advice, and as well her signature home design. So we had to get our heads around that. And quite frankly, we had some contractual restrictions as well because of their agreements with Scripps and HGTV. A certain percentage of the magazine could not be home content, wouldn't feature shows that were, or homes that were shown on Fixer Upper. So it was just having to get our heads into a little different mind space with this. The key thing that I would call out here is how carefully, with the Magnolia brand, how carefully curated all of this stuff is. I was telling somebody last night that when you go to the Magnolia market and you walk around and you're taking things and looking at them and you find something you want to buy, you pick it up off the shelf, and they're not really shelves, they're all these beautifully little created vignettes, and within about 2 minutes, someone very discreetly walks by and takes something out of the counter and puts it right back on the shelf where you just took your thing. So all of these vignettes in the store are constantly displayed in exactly the way that Joanna wants them displayed. So with this super, super tight timeline, there was no chance that we were going to be able to create everything in this magazine from scratch in about the 90 days we had to get it to our pre-press and production groups. So one of the things that Meredith does really well, and part of why this relationship worked well, is food and garden content. We, of course, have our asset library of millions and millions of images that we were able to dive into. Joanna wanted to do a story about pies, and she wanted to do a story about fall root vegetables. So without having to go seek out new photography, we could find photography that fit the aesthetic. Felt like the risk was low enough. Some of these things have been published in other SIPs, but all new content, all new words, all new display. But that's really what helped round out that first issue of the Magnolia Journal. That allowed us then to put, did I skip one? That allowed us then to put our most precious resource, which in this case was time, into the really high impact pieces in the magazine. And those were going to be the pieces featuring the Gaines family. That was a discussion early on, continues to be a discussion, how prevalent Chip and Jo want to be in the magazine, how much they want their children to be in the magazine, how they'd like this thing to grow beyond the fairly Waco-centric publication that it is today. That's their goal, that's where they're moving, but you start with what you know. So the Gaines family likes to, on their property almost every night when the weather's nice, have a campfire. So we went down and produced a campfire story for the magazine. And because this was coming out in fall and the theme of the issue was gathering, Joanna wanted to do a Friendsgiving piece. And so that's what you see produced there on the right. These were also really good introductory example, or a good introduction to them into the need to shoot seasonal content. So this was a fall magazine that we were shooting in the depths of summer in Waco, Texas. So that was about 100 degrees the day that we did the campfire shoot, and yeah, you guys got to wear your flannel and your jeans. And then the Friendsgiving shoot, we had an air conditioner hooked to that barn, and it never got below about 105 degrees inside. So that was hard. But really got some beautiful photography, and these really turned out to be two of the most well-received stories in the issue. Just beautiful. It did lead to some opportunity to discuss again, how is this thing going to work? So when we came down to Waco, we had a Meredith team and we had the Magnolia team. And who's in charge when you have two art directors on set? And we don't quite yet get the Magnolia aesthetic, and they don't quite get the technicalities of shooting photography for a print magazine, and how does that all work? So some interesting discussions and learnings for both sides, and frankly, that continues today. So as the photography came together, the stories began to come together, and the design is where the Magnolia team really dug in and wanted to be hands-on. And I will tell you, Joanna herself, on each and every page of the magazine, paid very, very careful attention to the typography, to placement, traditional rules of magazine design and magazine journalism, didn't necessarily mean anything. There was a lot of explanation as to why, and then discussion about whether or not we had to do it. In the end, the thing sells 70%, so it doesn't, what do the rules mean, But it ended up being a really beautifully laid out magazine, collaboration between the two teams. And one of the other things we were able to do, again, because of the Meredith infrastructure that we were working within, for the home content, there does need to be some home content in this thing. Well, we already had several homes in our pipeline, things that we were planning to shoot or actually had already shot, that we made available to the Magnolia team, so we could have one or two good home locations in each story or in each issue. Same thing. Does the Meredith team handle that? And we hope we get it right. Does the Magnolia team go on location and handle that shoot and hope that everything is shot in a way that works for the printed page? In the end, we ended up sending members from both teams on the home location shoots. Continue to do that. Probably are beginning to move away from that as we all learn the aesthetic and how these things work. But again, it was just a real-time learning process along the way. Advertising showed up for this one. That's a huge win in this space. So, a lot of these partners that I showed up front don't necessarily, advertising's great, but they don't necessarily require advertising to be a successful project when you have that $10 or more cover price point. But Magnolia has a lot of brand partners who came knocking on Meredith's door wanting to be a part of this thing. And we were able then to have the Better Homes and Gardens publisher was assigned to sell Magnolia. And given the buzz that was sort of generated when this thing became announced, it just gave her an opportunity to go out and have some really good conversations that generated pretty significant business for this market segment. Then the reality set in for the Magnolia team that this gorgeous, gorgeous editorial that we've created is now going to be broken up by advertising. That, what do you mean we can't control the advertising? So another discussion. No, we generally don't art direct ads. That's a hard thing. And we want to have them there. There's a reason they're there. But we kind of compromised and said we would keep the advertising to roughly 25% in this first issue. Again, it's a premium product. It's a bookazine-like product. There's a perception, a high value perception on consumers' part. We didn't end up turning anybody away, but we've kind of kept that ratio in mind for these first few issues. And frankly, the reality of that is we're not in a position to be able to accommodate a dynamic book size at this point because we just don't have the library of content built up yet. So as we began to see what the reception for this thing would be, the normal process here would be to get a couple test issues to newsstand, see what happens, and if it looks like it's going to work well, start talking about a subscription program and maybe float a test of that. And Meredith's a very conservative company with these things. Point I should have mentioned early on, we don't want to take on any more risk with these things either than we have to. But as we saw what this looked like it was going to be, we did launch a small scale sub-test, got some good response to that. And what that really allowed us to do was begin to build a profile of who the Magnolia reader, the Magnolia Journal reader was going to be, which would help us in short order. So just like that, it was magic. No headaches, no missed deadlines, no arguments. There we had it. There we had a magazine. So first issue came out in October. The spring issue, which is the one you have in your bags here, came out in February. Again, have never quite seen anything like this on newsstand. Chip and Jo at the market, and I'm talking only the brick and mortar store in Waco, offered a pre-sale opportunity the weekend before the on-sale date. Sold 6,000 copies at their shop in Waco in a weekend, and we decided something's happening here. On the actual on-sale date, we started getting anecdotal reports from around the country. This Barnes & Noble has sold out. This Barnes & Noble has sold out. I had never seen that before. I didn't quite believe it. So that afternoon, I took about 20 minutes, and I just Googled a few random Barnes & Nobles and called asking for this. And yes, they were sold out. And yes, they were a little annoyed to have one more call asking for the thing. So Yeah, it was legit. Um, so what's worth noting is, yes, the first issue is the highest sell-through percentage I've seen in my 18 years at Meredith. The second issue is going to come in as one of the top 5. So even though we now have that subscription offer and the super fans have bought into that, it's still a huge performer on newsstand. So that is Magnolia Journal in a nutshell, but I want to come back here at the end to a couple of these others. And again, there's no magic formula here. There's no secret sauce. This is what we have found works for us when we're vetting some of these new opportunities. And it's really a simple evaluation of looking at the brand, what their audience looks like, what their reach is, and then trying to somehow gauge the sense of passion and engagement among those followers. There are food and home brands out there much, much larger than this, but whose fans I think would be unlikely to shell out $10 for a magazine or $20 for a yearly subscription to 4. So there's really a balance in there. And then coupled with, do they have existing creative staff to help create the thing? Do they have some existing content or the ability to help create content? Are they able to bring advertising partners to the table? And then what does Meredith contribute? So if you look at these 3, Magnolia, we all know where that's going, on track for an 800,000 rate base with the fall issue and probably over 1 million next year. Beekman 1802 Almanac, we did our 2 issues. We couldn't make it work. We couldn't scale it at that level, but I'm really happy to say they've continued self-publishing. It's a gorgeous magazine. It was one of Mr. Magazine's hottest launches last year. So we're really happy to see that one continuing, even if it's not continuing with Meredith. And then Forks Over Knives, like I said, that's the sleeper hit of the year, really strong newsstand performance. They didn't take, Chip and Jo took 50,000 magazines, I think, through their Magnolia operation and sold them all. These guys took a much smaller allotment, but sold out in 24 hours what they had. So again, that's a piece of the puzzle for us, is if the partner has the ability to do some of the heavy lifting on the marketing and promotion of the magazines and has the ability to sell, and even if that's directing digital customers back to a Meredith property to buy the magazine via a digital avenue, that's an option for us. So Forks Over Knives is expanding into regular newsstand distribution in 2018. So what does this all mean for us? Well, my bosses want to know what the next Magnolia is. So if any of you know, that would be great. We do have a couple new ones in the pipeline, a fun one coming in January we're not quite ready to announce yet, and a few others that we're working on. So again, this is about, to me, building a business of viable, solid brands that on their own may not be a Magnolia, but together, building some scale and creating a nice little business for Meredith and an opportunity for some brands who wouldn't quite get there otherwise. Questions?
Could you explain the dynamic a little bit more between the 2 art directors and how they settle on a rhythm?
Yeah. I think that it's fair to say that in the Magnolia space prior to the magazine, they're a very digitally driven brand. It's a matter of getting a beautiful shot, and if it's for Instagram, you're then able to edit that shot in whatever way works and run it through whatever filters work. And it's a different experience than creating something for print. So an example I can give you would be in that Friendsgiving story. The Magnolia team really liked the idea of doing a top-down look at the table place settings and had 6 place settings on the table and intended this to be a full spread bleed photo in the magazine. Well, what happens to the 2 that are right in the middle? If you're art directing this for the printed page, you know that those place settings are going to be split by the gutter. So that conversation happened. In the end, they ended up shooting it a couple of ways, and it ran that way, and they were happy with it that way. So it's just a matter of we're not there to tell them, we're not there to tell any of these partners what their brand aesthetic needs to be. We're there to offer our best advice. We're there to offer our experience in the space to them and ultimately let them make the decision, but make sure we don't let them go astray in a way that would have them come back later looking at the printed magazine and saying, why did you let me do this?
You mentioned a subscription offer. Did that tap into the Magnolia list of followers, or did you also tap into some of their Home to Gardens
It did, and Steve, I think, will speak on that later.
Yes, we did that. We haven't gone directly to the Magnolia audiences yet, but we sell in their stores with its own SKU.
Yeah.
And that's been very successful. And targeting our own billboards for that has also been very successful.
That's fascinating. I may have missed it, but the initial link up between Meredith and Magnolia, was it you contacting them or them contacting you?
As far as I know, because I wasn't involved at that stage, it was them reaching out to a couple of different publishers. So they would have reached out to our business development group and floated the idea.
Right, and did other companies get to present to them, or were you just the chosen partner?
I don't know.
How many ad pages were you first issued?
Oh, 25. And it was a 96-page book, 100 total with covers. So.
I'm curious, the Gaineses have a faith component.
Yeah.
Is that part of the story? And do you have an in-house editor-writer who can understand and appreciate the nuances of that and represent that, or do you have a freelance?
I think that is absolutely part of the story and part of the success of this magazine. They're very careful in how they approach that within the pages of the magazine because they want it to be accessible and welcoming to everyone, but they also want to make it clear that their faith is important to them. As this thing has developed, the editorial is being primarily vetted and created by their team in Waco. We're actually, now that we are ready to flip the switch and make this thing a full-fledged subscription magazine, if the positions aren't posted now, they'll probably be posted by the end of the week. So there are a few editorial positions coming to the Waco office for this magazine. And it's just been an evolution. So I don't know a good answer to that except to say that yes, it's part of the success of this magazine, and yes, it is reflected in the pages of the magazine.
As this thing grows, and as you mentioned now, it's become a study-based magazine, at what point, or does it change from Meredith Cormier to a full-fledged Meredith?
Right now.
Okay.
So, yeah, we are hiring right now. I will no longer, this will move out of my group and become its own freestanding unit at Meredith. And that's the success story, right? So if Meredith Core Media is meant to be the creative lab to get some of these ideas off the ground, some of them will work really well. Some of them will work well enough that maybe we'll keep them around like forks over knives and just kind of see how that works without putting staff against it or a lot of resources against it. And some of them we won't be able to continue. But this one is an example of one that within a year is now being separated out. Was there one more?
I had a question about their book, which came out in the fall, and they have a home goods product. And was there any synergy there with the magazine?
No, those things have been difficult to achieve, but certainly talked about. Yeah. Thank you.